Steve Hatch, MD of Facebook in the UK. Pleasure. Good evening. Good evening. If you're anything like me and you need your hands to talk, the idea of having one occupied by a microphone is slightly challenging, so bear with me. Welcome to Facebook's London HQ. I'm Steve Hatch. I'm the MD for Facebook for UK and Ireland. And I'm pretty sure this is the first session that we've run in our new home. So if you're anything like me and you're trying to work out which chairs to steal, the ones on the 6th floor are the best. So we've got a lot to thank there. It's an incredible evening that we have for us this evening. We're so pleased to have Lord Browne and to have an event run by Suki and to have Maxine, head of diversity for Facebook. When I was asked to open this evening, there were kind of three reasons why I wanted to be here. Kind of first, we're a global platform, and therefore we need to represent the globe. And in the UK, anybody have a guess how many people come onto Facebook every day in the UK? 16 million? Did I hear 16 million? Will somebody come and go higher than that? Higher than 16 million? 13. Okay, every day in the UK, 26 million people come onto Facebook. So if we want to be a business that understands 26 million people every day, we need to reflect 26 million people every day. The second part of that is, in Facebook, just like everybody else, we're in a battle for talent. And if we're not picking the best talent, or if the best talent doesn't believe that this isn't a great home for them, we've got a business issue. And it's one we're keen to address. And the kind of third part of this is, I'm kind of with Freud when he said the secret of a happy life is love and meaningful work. Now, we can maybe do something about the former. In fact, I've been on some very good nights at Facebook already where people are doing an awful lot about the former. But we can definitely do something about the latter. And for us, if people are going to have a meaningful experience working at Facebook, it means they're bringing their whole selves into the office. You know, those are the moments of pure joy in work. When we're here, we're committed, and we are being ourselves. So I'm delighted to introduce from Outstanding Suki, whose business mission and individual mission is to help everybody be themselves and fulfill themselves in the workplace. Please clap for Suki.
Welcome, everyone. I hope you're all very excited about tonight's event with Lord Browne and Maxine at Facebook, which we're very excited to be here. I just want to say a few thank yous. A thank you to Facebook for hosting this evening. To Michael in particular, who's done lots of coordination efforts, so thank you, Michael. To Maxine for flying all the way over from San Francisco to be here this evening to actually interview John. She literally arrived this afternoon, so that's brilliant. And also to Steve for saying a few words tonight. Thank you for being here. We actually hope that Facebook is going to be joining Outstanding soon. So I'm actually meeting Maxine tomorrow to do a debrief about this event. So nothing like a bit of peer pressure this evening from you all to help close the deal tomorrow. And also seeing as we're in Facebook, we have an Outstanding page on Facebook. I think we have something like 971 likes. So if 29 of you like it tonight, we might get to 1,000. So I'd really appreciate it. Not during the interview, of course. We want you to be paying attention to John. I want to do a special mention also to Claudia Bryn Woody. She's one of our top 10 leaders in the Power List from IBM. She last week got her indefinite leave to remain in the UK, and she won an award for Ambassador of the Year at Workplace Pride. So we salute you. I'd like to give her a round of applause. So now for the main event. The Glass Closet has had a phenomenal amount of coverage, so I hope you've all read it. Shame on you if you haven't, but at least you're here tonight to hear the man speak about it today. The format of the evening is Maxine and John will discuss the book for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then there'll be a chance for Q&A afterwards. Maxine will then close that, and then there'll be more drinks and canapes through to the other room, courtesy of Facebook. So some of you know that I quite like to tell you a funny or interesting fact about our guests before I introduce them, so I hope these ones don't disappoint. Maxine wasn't always the Global Diversity Director for Facebook. She used to be a main character on a Caribbean soap called Westwood Park. If you Google it, it's actually on YouTube. You can Google scenes. So her character was called Devines, Isis Devines, who stole babies, money, and once killed an opponent with a cricket bat while he slept in his bed. So let's hope she's kinder to Lord Browne this evening.
When he's not sleeping.
So John is a business leader, but wasn't always known for doing fun in business. So imagine his surprise on a shooting trip when he was shot in the buttock by one of his business rivals. John doesn't want to forget something like that, so John reacted by buying the rival's company in one of the world's biggest ever industrial takeovers. I'm sure that taught him a lesson or two. So please put your hands together for Maxine and John.
So a lot to talk about in a little bit of time. I feel bad that I'm so short and I can't see the faces of people in the back rows. But when it comes to question time, feel free to wave wildly. So, Lord Browne, this book is in part about your personal journey and experiences, but largely about data, a roadmap, guidelines, tips. It's incredible research. For somebody like me, who is a diversity professional, it's almost a manual on what to do, how to approach LGBT issues. So I thank you for that. But tell us, why did you choose to write this book and a book of this nature?
Good evening. I wrote this book really for three reasons. The first is to make sure that nobody ever did what I did in getting into a position where coming out or being pulled out was such an extraordinary and traumatic event. Secondly, I wanted to tell the story of people, both good experiences about coming out and being in business, being out in business, and not such good experiences as well. Not a Panglossian tale of perfection, but something which had edge, a bit of grit, but actually something people could identify with, little bits of other people, if they felt unsure about themselves and needed more confidence. So in role models, there's always something that you can build into yourself. You can see a bit of it. And then the third bit of the book is I kind of wanted to write a letter to all the straight people in the world, and which said, you know, you've really got to think about LGBT in a very different way. And I characterized the straight people in this book as the CEOs of all the companies, most of whom were male, most of whom were white, and almost all of them, and I know this for sure, were straight. In fact, in the US, you had to go down to, I think, S&P number 723 before you could find an out gay CEO. So it seemed to be a pretty obvious thing to do, was to sort of write a letter right at the end of the book, avoiding too much didactic activity, you know, you must do this, you must do that, but rather say, how about thinking about it? Because there are stories that might point you in a way which you hadn't thought about. So that was the reason I wrote the book, and the only reason I got around to writing the book was someone pushed me into it. Mm-hmm. And actually, without enough push, I would have said, an interesting book to write, I'll get round to it one day. Mm-hmm. But someone said, it's time to write the book. And that was actually the woman who runs the publishing company that published it in the UK. Okay.
Was it still a little bit uncomfortable as you sat to write it to talk about the parts that were personal?
Yes, it was. And I think, you know, there's no substitute for calling a spade, but to call a spade a spade. And it's an English phrase, you know, and so you have to sort of get round to writing it the way it really was, and using very direct language, mm-hmm. which I hope I've done, and it takes several goes to get there. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, I made a sequence of errors of judgment, really bad ones, in my life, I suppose they are the following. First of all, I made a relationship with someone, and I thought it, in the face of all the facts that would have shown me that it was not the right thing to do, to get someone on an escort dating site. Secondly, to be very surprised when he sold his story to a national newspaper. And thirdly, to lie to my lawyer and Henson a witness statement about how I met him, because that was the cover story we'd used. So that was an error. So those were three big errors, and I think you have to say it the way it is. And so it takes a few goes to get there.
Why did you think how you met was the most embarrassing thing, was the thing you were prepared to lie about? Why did that seem so critical?
You never know, of course, but I think it was, I was so used to being, to pretending that nobody knew I was gay. Remember, I started I'm a bit older than most people here, and when I went to university, being gay and doing something about it, homosexual acts were illegal, and that you could go to jail. But rather more importantly, you could be blackmailed, you could be bullied, all that information could be used against you in ways which exposed being gay as a weakness. So that was part of my background, but my other part of my background was, of course, my mother, who was a survivor from Auschwitz, and she had two rules of life. One is never tell anyone a secret unless you want them to use it against you, because they certainly will. They'll exploit a weakness through a secret. And secondly, never be a member of an identifiable minority, because when the going gets tough, the minorities are persecuted. And I think, based on her experience, that was 100% accurate. So she basically surrounded me with this idea, and combined with the chance of being blackmailed and illegality, it was very clear. I made a decision. You were going to be straight, you were going to be absolutely without sexuality publicly, whatever you did privately. So I ran these two lives, and I was so used to running two lives that why would I change? Why would I, even in the face of facts?
I'm surprised that you didn't take it one step further, which is where, when people feel persecuted, some go, which is to create a whole other cover life, get a wife, have some children, right? So that people would stop asking questions.
Indeed. I mean, I think, well, I just didn't do that. Maybe I drew the line, I don't know, but I just didn't actually do it, or instead I just spent my life working instead.
One of the themes that comes out in the book is the consequences of staying in the closet, the personal consequences. So he talks about the loneliness, and not just the loneliness in terms of not having a life partner, but actually I feel that you address the issue of basic intimacy, of not asking co-workers personal questions because you don't want those asked of you, for fear that something will be revealed.
I tell a story in the book of a woman, a lesbian, who worked for a very important defense contractor in the United States. And she came out, and when she came out, she said to her co-workers, let me describe to you what it was like before I came out. I want you to go back to your office. I want you to pack away all the photographs and memorabilia of your family. I want you to take off your wedding ring. I want you never to talk about what you did in the weekend. And when your partner is ill, I want you to change he to she and she to he. And then see how that was. Just see how you like that, because that's what it was like. As a result, you can't actually do what people normally do, is just talk about what you do outside work. And people do that. People obviously do that, and they're encouraged to do it because they're whole people, and it makes teams feel better when you can swap things which aren't to do with market share or return on capital employed. you can do something different. And if you can't do that, then you become, as another friend of mine told me, it's a remarkable story. So I went off to San Francisco to see a friend of mine and go to the opera, someone I'd worked for a long time ago. And his wife came, and I knew his wife. And as we were talking about this book, she said to me, well, she said, I always knew that you were probably gay because you were so reserved. And she said, you know, you were reserved in that English sense, but also in American sense. You just reserved everything to yourself, and you were your work. And then she said to me, even more remarkably, she said, you know, of course, I'm bisexual. And I said, I didn't know that. And she said, well, yes, and what's more, I was the editor of a magazine called Lunch, which was the original campaign publication for the campaign for homosexual equality in London. And so I went off and tried to buy copies of this thing when I got back, which I managed to do. And there were some remarkable interviews with David Hockney and all sorts of people in this book, in this magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and
but
you didn't know that about her life either?
I didn't know that about her, no.
As you go through the book, you'll see that he does a great job as well of sort of drawing out the history of change, right? From when you grew up, before that actually, you go way back. You talk about the Romans, you talk about people's different society, different cultures, how we perceive sexuality, sexual orientation. And then I wonder, as you got into your era going forward, every time you felt a barrier come down, so gays can serve in the military, civil union, did you inside of you, while you were still in the closet, start to feel like maybe my time is coming? Or by that time, had you been so deep inside that you couldn't see your way out?
Absolutely, no. It never crossed my mind. Never crossed my mind. I was, you know, when you've invested 40 to 50 years building something, an edifice, however artificial it might be, you're going to keep reinvesting in the building. And you just can't get out of it because you've built this great edifice. And how do you tear it down? It's almost impossible. So I never did, really. I never even thought about it.
So I was thinking, I have a friend who works in the internal affairs division of the police force. And he talks about when a criminal escapes from prison, often when they're caught, they're relieved, and all they want to do is sleep. Like, now the pressure is off, because when they're on the run, right, they have to be on the run constantly. It just takes too much energy. And I wonder if, in some ways, as dramatic and as crushing as it was, the way you were outed, did you sort of feel like, now I'm finally free?
Only later, if I'm honest. I mean, during the process, well, let me be clear. So I behaved, I suppose, most people looking at what I did would say, yep, that's exactly what he was likely to do. So, of course, I tried to fight the story. So I took out a set of injunctions, so-called super injunction, which stayed in place until right at the end, from February to the end of April. In my heart of hearts, I knew that it wasn't going to work, but it's what you do. So I spent, so we were just talking before you came on, as it were, between us, but my last visit was to Trinidad and Tobago, to see the then Prime Minister Patrick Manning, to have a chat with him. And it was when after I chatted with him, I flew back to London, and then I went to see my chairman, and I said, I think we should accelerate the succession. I couldn't tell him why, but we did that anyway. It was going to happen reasonably soon. So someone was appointed at least as my deputy, which meant I had a bit of relief inside the company. And then we had this injunction in place. But during that time, of course, I was not allowed to speak to anyone, otherwise it would be contempt. So I couldn't talk to anyone about what was going on. So I had to pretend on the outside that things were just fine, perfect. And inside there was all this stuff going on until the very end when the judgment was released. So I felt when the judgment came out, I was actually relatively numb, I'd say. And then I spent 3 days being persecuted by the paparazzi and press everywhere. I mean, on motorbikes following the car and all sorts of stuff like that, big lenses focused inside my apartment building. And then after that, I went off and spent a week with some friends in Spain who were very wise, who kept reminding me of their favorite phrase, which is, the dogs bark and the caravan moves on. In other words, you won't be, this will just go. And at that point, I began to feel quite relieved.
Now, as you sit here today, you seem so incredibly self-aware. You know, to be able to look back on your life and think, I think this is what caused me to make those choices, and this is why I continued. And as I read the book, I thought, he has to have an incredible therapist. Like, how do you come to that place of absolute self-awareness after living for so long with lie after lie after lie, you know?
Well, I mean, partly it's also true. You have an incredible therapist. But that's not enough. You just have to, you have a great partner, which I have. You have to have, listen to the therapist. You have to listen to everybody else. And actually, there's kind of no way out of it. You know, life is about enjoying the day, about being aware of who you are, and actually you begin to think that, and life is, and as you get older, of course, it all becomes a bit more graphic, really, because time moves. But I think over time, I suppose the thing I regret a lot is I wish I were more authentic with the team inside BP when I was running BP. And of course it's completely hypothetical, because I couldn't have been as myself, but it's a piece of great regret. So I don't have regrets, because again, my mother always taught me, never look back. It's therein lies madness. Only the future matters. So but I do think to me it was very important to figure out how I can give back in this area, and it's taken me a long time to figure out something to do, and I want to do that. And I don't regard the book as just a book. I regard it as the start of, or the addition to a movement. And it is not a campaign, a movement, which is about being openly gay in business, bring your whole self to work, as our host said just a moment ago. All of this is really important to get achieved. And there's plenty of work to do, as I think I've discovered post the publication of the book and during the writing of the book, with so many younger people, and there are plenty of younger people in the audience here, but so many younger people who really wanted to stay in the closet. In business, fearful of being out, being regarded as a sign of weakness, exploited by their peers, viewed as something as not quite right by their superiors, getting in the way of promotion in heavily competitive environments. I don't agree with any of that, but that's what was in their heads, and trying to get them from there to somewhere else, I think requires a lot of work.
Now we have a few questions that came on Facebook that I want to ask. One is that people are asking, if we accept that it may be easier now to be out in the workplace than it was when you started off, what is the advice that you would give for young people in business now? Do they, from the beginning, come as they are? Or the other thing that you show in the book is that we're a long way from the ideal. So despite the fact that it is easier, it is still not clear that being out, open, authentic will not hamper someone's career. And so they're asking, where is the balance there? What's your advice to them?
Well, I think first it takes more than just the person to do it. So I would hate it if people think of themselves as victims and not able to do things themselves. But equally, the environment has to be set right. So go back to the letter to all the straight people, which is set the right environment. Really do that. And this is about an unremitting and uncompromising message from the top, which says we're going to be inclusive in this area, and let me say on gender as well, but we really are going to be inclusive. And if someone behaves out of line with that value, they will no longer be part of this society called this company. An absolutely unremitting message has to go through, not just from the top, but throughout the leadership ranks, if you will. And it needs to be measured through survey, which is imperfect, but it'll do, to make sure that that message is actually going through. Then I think you've got that. Then I think you can say, in general, it's easier to come out the younger you are.
But you even give examples of companies that are doing very well in terms of leadership, making a stand, companies that are part of the Human Rights Campaign, Corporate Equality Index, right? So they're doing the surveys, they're making the benefits, and yet people within the organization say, that's good for them, I don't want to risk it. And I think I see a parallel at Facebook. Of course, Sheryl Sandberg is our COO, and she also wrote a book called Lean In, about women in the workplace. And she says that until a couple of years ago, she didn't want to refer to herself as a woman. And by all accounts, she was very successful.
I think the journey is a long journey. And I was with a very well-known bank, which is not, I think, represented here, so I'll give you that clue, in New York last week. And in spite of the fact of all the messages being right, people are saying, yes, but it's not there yet, because I think it's really their reason was very simple. It's because there is not enough time dedicated to this subject and talking about it and talking to people about it by managers throughout the ranks of the company. And I believe that, because you have to get the signals absolutely right inside a company so that people don't keep just talking about the hard-edged components of business. And most signals in business, to the CEOs as well, they say, I've got to talk about every single hard-edged point. Quarterly earnings, my cash balances, the balance sheet, the market share, the latest customers, you name it. And they don't actually talk a lot about their team. And if you talk about the team in front of, for example, sell-side analysts, they roll their eyes and look at the chandelier and say, when is he going to stop that? Let's get on to tell me what the forecast is for the next quarter. But actually, every time I look at business, I say that the only way of really judging a great business is judging the quality of the team, which includes what's in its head and how it behaves in the workplace. So therefore, CEOs and senior managers need to visibly spend more time on this topic. And it's not just the HR people, it's the leadership. So in my present manifestation, private equity, where we have to deal with very low intensity overhead. So the question then is, how do you judge how you make an investment? Do you just run the numbers and say that's the answer? Or do you actually have to look at something very different? And my view is you look at something very different. You look at the quality of the people that you're actually investing, because in this case you really are investing in them. You're investing in the people. And it's right at, I think, the leading edge of trying to understand what's in people's minds and how they're going to spend their time with you, time on the business, and interacting as a team. And if there's a barrier somewhere in that team, it's probably not going to work. And you're probably not going to get a really good investment result in spite of all the numbers showing great results. So I think there's more, when I talk to my peers or my past colleagues, I say, spend more time on things that really matter. And the internal team is what really does matter.
As you talk about the team, a theme that I feel also came up in the book is that excellence may buy you more freedom. So there are a few examples of people who chose to come out who were making a lot of money, quite frankly, for the business. And it felt like that gave them a little cover. And my question is therefore, are there two different standards? If you are an average performer on that team, is it more risky? If you're a clear rock star, are you the ones who can afford to come out?
So the answer is a bit of everything, obviously, and it depends on the circumstances. I think I turn around the argument. Often it is actually, I think, the case that members of minorities always overperform in order to compensate their position in minorities. I mean, they generally do when they can. So I think one of the reasons for getting this right in an inclusion approach is actually you're denying yourself probably a slightly biased sample to excellence if you don't get this right. I think that's really quite important. I think it's all about confidence. You know, confidence can come from overachieving or from being the highest earner in a company or being the most liked person in the company, or actually seeing something about yourself in someone else who's been successful. Aspiration. I think it's all of the above, really, and I think we've got to help, everyone's got to help, giving a piece of that to everybody. But there's something about aspiring to being a whole individual that is a great thing and might get people to feel more comfortable.
Yes.
You know, I think no one size fits all, I'm afraid, here.
All right, as we speak about everyone, let me open it up to everyone, because there must be people in the audience who have their own questions. Yes? I think somebody has a microphone, maybe?
Hi, my name's my name's Adrian. I work for the BBC. Clearly, since you started working, then since you were very publicly outed, things have moved on a lot in the UK. When you're doing business around the world, how easy do you think it is now to be a whole person if you're dealing with companies in countries where the atmosphere isn't so enlightened?
So let me, I think, so sitting in London, it's easy to think the whole of the UK is a solved problem. I would suggest that may not be right anyway. I think sitting in New York or San Francisco, LA, and looking round and saying it's all done can't be right. I mean, there are 50 different nations in the United States alone. So I think plenty of work needs to be done, and I wouldn't want anyone to be rather complacent and say, well, we can take our eye off it now, because I think constant vigilance is needed. So the question is Uganda, Nigeria, places like that. I think two things. First is companies cannot change laws. I mean, we cannot do that. What we can do is influence by being there. So I see no basis for a barrier not to send someone who's gay to Uganda, provided the company knows the risks and the person knows the risks, and they do not break the law in the country. By having people in a country, it's very possible for leaders to have conversations with the leaders of the country and to say, we really think it would help if you kept moving along here. Governments can provide sanctions. So the United States has just done something about aid to Uganda. Companies can't really do that, because if it isn't government to government, if companies withdraw themselves from one place, chances are the space will be filled by somebody else who just won't bother, and so it'll go backwards. That's not always the case. If you have the unique solution to something, it's possible they'll tolerate your comment, but I bet they won't change anything. But I think it's influence that matters and not withdrawal.
Another question? Lady in back.
Hi, Lord Browne. My question's rather personal question, so I hope you don't mind. I was wondering, so how you viewed gay men, lesbians in the years that you were in the closet. I'm thinking about the 60s and 70s. Did you have a need to come out and want to sort of go out partying with them or join their movements, or did you feel, well, really, how did you feel?
Well, of course, I had a secret, a deep undercover life, quite literally. In fact, I think in some ways I thought of myself as a little James Bond, you know, having a legend and having the reality. So there was always a very hidden away life somewhere. I regard as very dangerous. Be very careful where you went, who you met, all these sorts of things. So I was always there. And then in business, I just built a barrier and a filter and never thought of any of it.
When the political stuff was happening, did you feel that you wanted to go out with them? Did you feel that you wished
No, I knew I couldn't. So therefore I stopped myself.
Yes.
Hi, Lord Browne. My name's Tim Campbell.
I think you need a...
Tim Campbell. My question's really around the business case around diversity. I spend an awful lot of time working with employers, educating about the power of taking on young emerging talent, and particularly for those who are visibly different from what the norm would be. And in this situation where it's not a visible difference, what's the business case that underpins making organisations more open to diverse talent?
Well, because it's not visible, well, let me back up. It is simply this, that to run two lives, if you're not out, you will do that, takes a lot of energy. And there is, as Peter Sands, I quote, as saying, there's a hidden cost to hidden lives. And it really is there. So people spend a lot of time thinking about things other than work in a counterproductive way. They have to dissemble, they have to change things, and they can't be parts of teams. So can you measure the loss of productivity? You can guess at it if you make lots of assumptions, but this may be, you know, up to 1% of global GDP you could think of being lost this way. Do the math. Many consultants, which I worry about, say up to 30% loss of productivity when people don't feel included in an organization. So this is about productivity. If you really, it is about productivity, and it's also about recruitment, because I think people will better go to places that they feel that they can be themselves, and that's the way people correctly behave.
Yes.
Hello, my name's Sharon Evans. I'm Chief Executive of a children's charity, so my question's slightly different to others. We're proud to say that we work with Ben Cohen's Stand Up Foundation, and I'd like to ask you how important you believe it is for education. So we work with primary school children and secondary school children, and actually role models are very important. And I wondered whether you would think that coming to speak to a group of children in this way would be important, so that we can actually, we teach children to value themselves and to be comfortable with being who they are, and life skills. So actually, how important do you think education is, so that people don't go through the pain of growing up with having to pretend that they're not who they truly are?
Well, I think it's very important. I think it's very important, and it can be done in such a very good way, because many people have learnt about how to explain sexuality to children, and it creates just a better person. I'm a member of the Speakers for Schools, so I go to these failing schools. So I went to a school to talk to them, and everyone was very well behaved. And the third question was, do you have a girlfriend? So I said, no, I have a boyfriend. and you could have heard a pin drop. I said, next question, you know, and they're obviously trying to set it up, you know, because they thought it was fun. And just a little bit of education, a little bit of just coaching would have changed that. I mean, my only experience, I don't speak to schools very often, but I found it an interesting experience.
Yes, one in front.
Hi, Lord Browne. Peter Sargent, Standard Chartered Bank in Hong Kong. I like your idea about being part of the conversation, and I agree that you can't have effective change unless you're part of that dialogue. I struggle a little bit with the idea of sending LGBT staff into environments that are so difficult, and I wonder about how effective they'll be as managers in those environments. But the question I had for you was particularly around Asia, where the culture is such that families aren't comfortable with their children coming out, and society is such that it's really about the family unit, and there's very strong religious backgrounds there. However inclusive we are as a company, I fear that people won't come out because of the family pressure. What role do we play in that, in terms of education and in terms of nurturing people to be authentic at work when there's that huge family pressure in somewhat of a small, closed society where someone's probably playing mahjong with somebody else in the office and they know their father and what have you. So I just wondered if you have any thoughts on that.
You've obviously defined a problem now so tightly that I can't get out of it. So if you define the problem like that, then there's no solution. But if you can define the problem as enlightening somebody, and I do think it's enlightening, somebody by seeing something different at work, then maybe, just maybe, a different dialogue will take place around the mahjong table. It's possible, it happens, but not always, not always. And there will be an irreducible number of people who will say, I cannot come out because my parents won't agree with it. I do think that I take your point. I think if you have the right environment inside a company, IBM are very important in this area, which says within the walls of IBM, it's a safe place to be out. I do think that you can influence change by having people there. And let me say, I think two things. One is, it would be wrong to deny opportunity to people who wanted to do this. It really would be. You're doing the wrong thing. Secondly, in many places, it is not the foreigner necessarily that is persecuted or bullied. It is the local. Because that's where the weak spot is. So I think having the foreigner there may just help strengthen a few ideas in this area.
But there's been lots of research on the fact that for the local, the corporation can act as a salvation. You know, the one place you can truly be yourself, and then from there you find the courage, the confidence
I think IBM
to do many
have
other
been at
things.
this for quite a long time. They've really done very good.
Yes.
Paul Browne from ITV. I'm actually a political correspondent, so I'm finding this interesting on all sorts of levels. But my question is quite personal, if you don't mind. Before you came out, when you presumably came across gay people at BP, how did you feel? And do you regret perhaps not championing them at the time? Or did you even hear people say things about other gay people in the workplace? How did you feel about those experiences?
So I actually, I didn't treat them any differently, and since I was a very reserved person, no one talked about sexuality with me, and I didn't talk to them about it either. So it's almost self-fulfilling, you know. However respect for authority has disappeared in society, when you are a chief executive or the deputy chief executive, people give you a degree of deference. And that deference is to pick up your behavior a bit in the way in which they talk to you. So if you don't talk about sexuality, no one else will. Do I regret and not championing? Absolutely. I think I've already said that in 2020 hindsight would be marvellous if I did that, but it's hypothetical. I didn't, and I couldn't because I'm me and I wasn't someone else.
But then that might beg the question, like everybody needs an outlet, right? So when you did find a space, some underground bar somewhere, were you the guy dancing on the tables? Because all the rest of the time you had to be so buttoned up.
But I made sure I didn't go to places where I met anyone, and that I knew, or that more precisely apparently worked for BP. And when the few occasions I did, I ran a mile very quickly and just hoped that no one would say anything. And sure enough, they didn't.
Yes.
Lord Browne, Tim Featherstone-Dilk from Accenture. How would you describe a role model? There's a lot of people here who have the potential to be role models in their organization. What would you say makes someone stand out as an effective role model for LGBT people?
Tim, I think not being perfect is the first piece of advice, I think. It's something to do with being real, just warts and all. You can't tell, it seems to me, you cannot tell whether you're an effective role model until someone else says you are. You can't model yourself to be a role model. So different people pick up different things, you know, whether it's status or whether it's behavior, whether it's how you handled a problem or how you had a problem. It's telling stories. And if everyone here told their story, that would be a fantastic database. More than that, a living set of parables that people could identify with. So one of the things I want to do is do just that. I've got this embryonic website called glasscloset.org, which is designed to collect stories. We're trying to figure out how best to do that, because people don't like writing long stories nowadays. But we can't do it in 140 characters. That's a different type of approach. But maybe we can do it in 100 words or 50 words. But little stories that will help people and say, I can see myself in a bit of that, makes a very big difference.
I think honesty is probably the thing that
Yes. Being
connects
real.
all role models, right?
Yes.
Whether they've failed, succeeded, had huge moral feelings, if they are honest about it, then that brings others along, right? So thank you so much, all of the others and everyone in this room who has come out to hear. This is a copy of the book, my little tattered version, but it's easy, and we haven't covered a lot of the data in it. But I think that could be very valuable for any of you who are heads of companies, senior leaders, who are thinking about how one proves. You know, in a technology company, everything is ones and zeros for us. We're always thinking, but what is the proof? It's okay to feel a certain way, but how do we show that that makes a difference? And I think Lord Browne helps us tremendously in this book by doing the hard work for us. So thank you for coming, and thank you for writing this.
Thank you.
More drinks and more food.